In this Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader review, I'm going to be talking about my experience with the game. I've played about 20 or 30 hours so far. I haven't played all the way through. It is quite a long game, and there is a lot to this game, but I kind of wanted to give you guys my impressions of the full version of the game, let you know what I think so far, and whether I think it's worth picking up or not if you are a crpg fan. So first, let's talk about some of the things I like about the game before we talk about some of the things that I don't like. And the first thing that I really love about Rogue Trader is the world building, the fantastic lore, and the sense that they really make you feel immersed in the 40k universe. They have done an outstanding job here. And this is something that I mentioned in our preview video back months and months ago, but they've just absolutely nailed this aspect. Everything really feels like 40k, and if you are a 40k fan or a 40k nerd, you are going to love this game. They have so many references, and they have like so much background exposition on things that they basically have like pop-out text that gives you background lore in case you don't know things about 40k. I am a 40k fan, but I am by no means a hardcore nerd, and I was really glad to have those explanations of things and definitions of things at hand, because it made understanding the story and what was happening a bit more palatable. If you are not a 40k fan, it can be a little bit much to chew into the overall lore and story of this game, but I think Owlcat has done a great job of making it easier for those of you that are not. The next thing I want to talk a bit about is combat. I love the turn-based combat in this game. Owlcat has moved away from real-time with pause. They've been adding turn-based combat. They added it to Pathfinder in Wrath of the Righteous, and now they've moved completely away from real-time with pause to turn-based in Rogue Trader, and it just makes total sense. When you see the combat of the game, there's absolutely no way that it could be tactical to the way that it is if you don't do it turn-based. And the combat feels a little bit like a combination of maybe turn-based Pathfinder and something like XCOM or Phoenix Point, something like that, where you have a cover system, you're using half and full cover to protect yourself from ranged attacks, while you're also moving up melee units to attack, and you're kind of using positioning on the battlefield based on where enemy units are to try and not get surrounded and flanked. And there's a lot of tactical positioning. One thing that I really love that they've done in combat, unless you've been ambushed, you get to place your characters at the beginning of combat. This is kind of a sore point with isometric RPGs, in my opinion, especially ones that are turn-based and party-based, is that sometimes when you go into combat, even if it's real-time, like if your formation is not perfect, and depending on who aggroes what first, you can kind of be out of formation, and you have a bad start to a combat. That doesn't happen hardly ever in this game. Again, like I said, unless you've been ambushed, and that's a particular case, because you really get to set up your characters where it makes most sense for them to be. You don't have to worry about your formation and stuff like that. Another thing that I really love about Rogue Trader is the character progression. It feels really good in this game. Coming from Baldur's Gate, where the progression felt kind of slow and you really didn't have too many decisions to make in the upgrade process, and sometimes you'd find gear and it would benefit you and not. I really like the way they've done it here. You level up much more frequently, and there are more choices to be made in the level up process, kind of like Pathfinder, to be frank. And it just feels better. Like you feel like you have more control of your character, and you're more engaged with the development of your character. And ultimately, this leads to characters that feel very unique, in my opinion, because there are things like being a psyker that's not attached to the class of the character. You can have all different types of psykers in the game, and you can have all different sorts of combat based on the weapons that you're using. Even the weapon type that you're using and the weapon skills that a character is using can really change their strategy in combat. And then you mix and match that with the different classes and advanced classes of the game. It's very, very fun, and I think players who are fans of having more control over their character, like, historic traditional RPGs, will really appreciate that in this game. Next, the companions are also really well done in this game. Anyone who's played an Owlcat game will know their companions are phenomenal. This shouldn't be like a big surprise to anyone. But the storylines are good, their personalities are good, their voice acting is fantastic. I actually wished more of the game was voice acted. Probably one of my pet peeves about this game is that it's not fully voice acted. It absolutely doesn't have to be. But I feel like if Owlcat's really going to take it to the next level and really push for that AAA quality, at some point they're going to have to voice everything. And that's tough to do, admittedly. There is a lot of dialogue in this game. There's a lot of reading in this game. It would be very hard for them to kind of weave the narratives that they do in their games, fully voice acting all of them. But if they could ever do that, it would be a monumental, phenomenal feat. Another thing about the game is its size. This should not be shocking to people. The game is probably 100+ hours long from what I've seen so far. And this is kind of par for the course with the Pathfinder games who are about the same size as this. You are not going to have a very short experience in this game. It's very, very long. So you're going to get a lot of bang for your buck in terms of like gameplay hours out of it. Particularly if you replay it with, you know, different alignments, like if you went dogmatic or heretical, you know, and see different outcomes, etc. And then last thing, another thing that I really love is the co-op. This game is up to 6-player co-op. I have not messed around much with the co-op. Admittedly, I've only done it 2-player, and that was pretty fun. But the fact that you can play this game up to 6 players is incredible. There are no games out there that support this many players playing co-op. And just the fact that you can play a CRPG co-op, the only people that have done it to date are pretty much Larian. So that's really, really nice. And if you want to get some extra mileage out of your game even, that co-op is going to push you even further. So now let's talk about some of the things I don't like about the game. You're almost too immersed in the game. If you are not a 40k nerd, if you're not somebody who's like up on your 40k lore, and like me, like for instance, I am a fan, but I am not, like, I don't know all the definitions and all the gods and all the blah and everything, like, and all the factions. It can be a lot, particularly at the beginning when you're just overwhelmed and bombarded by all of this stuff. Now, I don't mind, you know, I read a lot of fantasy and a lot of sci-fi, so it's not a big deal for me. But a lot of players might feel that it's too much for them. Even players that are fans of CRPGs like Pillars of Eternity that have a lot of reading might feel that this might even be too much for them. And I just want to throw that out there that there's a bit of a learning curve there at the beginning where, and even, you know, on into the game, that you're gonna have to take the time to like really like look at the definitions of things if you really want to understand what's happening. Another thing about the game, and this is going to sound like a silly complaint because it's almost not a complaint, is that there is a lot of combat in this game. A lot. I love combat in turn-based games, so this isn't necessarily a complaint. But there is borderline too much combat even for me. Like, every encounter is rather large, it feels like. Not all of them, but they take time. Turn-based combat takes time. It's probably the biggest downside of turn-based combat, is the amount of time that it takes to get through a combat. And a lot of combats, particularly at the beginning of the game, first 10 to 20 hours or so, are not overly difficult, but they're lengthy. And so you don't feel like you're particularly being challenged necessarily, but they're really drawn out. So your progress in the game sometimes feels like you played an hour and you did 2 fights. And they weren't particularly fights you were going to lose. It just took you that long to get through the fights. And there's maybe borderline too much combat in this game. Or it just could be that the way the combat is designed, there's a lot of like tons of enemies on the screen that are almost cannon fodder. And it would be more interesting to see more interesting combat mechanics earlier on in the game. There are obviously more advanced characters later on in the game, but near the beginning, it can kind of get a little bit repetitive because it just feels like you're wading through a bunch of cannon fodder where you're not really going to die that easily. Like, unless you're just really, really bad, you're not likely to die in these scenarios. And if you do die, though, that's even more time you spend in combat. Like, one combat, I, just made a mistake at the very end of like a 30-minute combat, and then I had to do the whole combat over again because I didn't save mid-combat, and then 30 more minutes that I wasn't going to die, just made a mistake right at the end and had to do it all over again. So there is a lot of combat in this game. That could be a real plus for you or a minus for you depending on how much combat you like in your game. And the next point is that there's a lot of reading in this game. There is a lot. And if you're coming from something like Baldur's Gate 3, where, you can read or you can watch the dialogue unfold because everything is voiced, it can be a bit jarring. And I don't mean like, oh, it's a CRPG, there's reading, it's like there's a lot even for a CRPG. And it can kind of disrupt the flow of the game when you like have to just read a lot of stuff. And this kind of piggyback off the point I made earlier. And I don't know how much everyone is really going to appreciate that. Some people, a lot of people who play RPGs, and particularly CRPGs, love dialogue and exposition and lore and all that. So it's not going to be a problem for a lot of people, particularly a lot of fans of this series and genre. But there are some players maybe coming from Baldur's Gate 3 that are looking for another CRPG to play that might get overloaded with the amount of reading that they have to do. So I just want to throw that out there. So all in all, I've really enjoyed my time with the game with Rogue Trader. It's one of those games where it's just a great combination of storytelling, companions, character progression. I really dig the combat and the setting of the game. They're all really fantastic. And I really enjoy my time playing it, but I would say that sometimes I just need to take a break. Like sometimes it's like reading a novel or a combat just took 2 hours. I need to get up and like go do something else for a little bit, come back. There it doesn't flow completely smoothly where I play these really long gameplay sessions of like 10 to 12 hours, which I do in like other, CRPGs, like I did in Pillars of Eternity, like I did in Pathfinder, like I did in Baldur's Gate 3, Divinity, etc., where you just sit and play all day and the next thing you know, it's like 4 in the morning. I couldn't really do that with this game so far. Like I have to take breaks because there's just a lot being thrown at you, and sometimes you just need to decompress from it. That said, I would highly recommend this game for people who like tactical combat, who like sci-fi, who like 40K. Those are the people that this game is really made for. If you don't have a problem reading a lot of stuff and learning about stuff you might not necessarily know about, it's great. And if you have a couple friends to play with, even better. But if you're someone who, likes a more traditional RPG, that things are explained a little bit better and there isn't as much reading and, particularly about things you may not know anything about, this might not be the game for you. Another thing is I've been playing this on PC. I have not played this on console, but it feels like a game that would be quite difficult to play on console. I know Fex played both Pillars of Eternity's games on console. She made it through both of those, which is impressive. But I can't imagine, the older consoles like PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, the load times might take a really long time. There's a lot of load screens in this game, and I gotta think that it's probably pretty frustrating. So I recommend playing on PC or minimally on the newer consoles if possible. So that kind of wraps up my review. I definitely think if you're a CRPG fan, particularly one who likes sci-fi and turn-based combat, you'll really love this game. If you're someone who likes real-time combat or doesn't like a lot of reading or just doesn't really like the 40K universe, it's probably not for you. But let me know what you guys think. Have you guys been playing it? I know I got my review out a little bit late. What do you think so far? Did you guys play the co-op thing earlier this year? What did you think? Let me know in the comments below.